Welcome to Open Spaces from Wyoming Public Radio News. I'm Nikki Willett. Our state government reporter dove into election complaints to see voters' concerns.
When you get down to whether there was outright fraud and voter cheating, that is not happening.
We hear from this year's State Park Artists in Residence.
You can help somebody see the beauty around you where you live, even though they may not pay much attention to it on a day-to-day basis.
And we get a sneak peek at the new season of our podcast, The Modern West. It's about the quirky and sometimes extreme workarounds Westerners are finding for affordable housing.
Over and over, I heard it's not really fair to let more and more people face the hardships of this lifestyle as an answer to a larger social problem.
Those stories and more, stay with us. This is Open Spaces.
This time on The Modern West, we start a brand new season about the oddball workarounds Westerners are finding for the affordable housing crisis. We hear stories of people going off-grid in RVs, tiny homes, cars, yurts.
Everybody's looking for a little bit of freedom, a little bit of autonomy. I think that's what people yearn for.
Cheap Dirt. It's season 11 of The Modern West. Find it under podcasts at wyomingpublicmedia.org.
Welcome to Open Spaces from Wyoming Public Radio News. I'm Nikki Willett. Families around the country are having fewer children as people make profoundly different decisions about their lives. There's been an especially steep drop in fertility rates in Western states, including Wyoming, which has also seen a big jump in the cost of housing. Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Mersbach reports.
A sea of toddlers throw around colorful blocks and balls at an indoor play center in the Wyoming state capital of Cheyenne. 21-year-old Grace Moreno is here with her 11th-month-old, who's dressed in pajamas with little fire trucks on them.
It's the only free place, so it's worth it.
Finances are tight for Moreno and her husband. They moved here from Texas while pregnant so her husband could work a higher-paying electrician job. But now with their baby boy, paychecks seem to disappear.
Our rent in Texas was like $800. Here it's like $1,775.
Rent is their biggest cost. Then $300 a week on groceries, $100 on formula, car payments, and paying for their son's delivery.
I remember sitting there looking at like a stack of mail, probably like maybe 3 inches tall, full of hospital bills, ER bills, and I looked at my husband, I was like, I don't ever want to do this again.
Just 6 weeks after giving birth, Moreno decided to get her tubes tied. She once thought she'd have multiple kids.
I was kind of like, oh my gosh, my mom was right. Like, this is too expensive.
Only having one kid means Moreno's family can save a couple $100 a month for a mortgage, so their son can someday have a backyard. At the moment, though, interest rates are still relatively high.
Not only are homes more expensive, but then add, a 7% rate on top of that.
Emily Harris, a demographer at the University of Utah, says Wyoming's fertility rate is just above the national average, but still too low to replace the state's population. But like many Western states, Wyoming's population is growing. Lots of people are moving to the region to escape bigger cities and for an outdoorsy quality of life, which is driving up home costs. Harris says things like childcare costs and generational values also play into people's childbearing decisions, and that they're definitely changing.
We have this idea of like the nuclear family and, you need to get married and then you buy a home and then you have children. And really over the last decade or two, that kind of timeline has been halted and kind of rearranged.
Some states are passing laws aimed at easing housing costs for young families, but not Wyoming. Trey Sherwood is a Democratic state lawmaker from Laramie.
The biggest barrier to addressing this housing crisis is really convincing my colleagues that the government has a role to play.
Progressives have pushed for a state fund to help build more affordable housing. The Republican supermajority says that would just gum up the wheels of the free market. They say bills they passed to restrict abortion access, allow nannies to care for more children, and ease property taxes are family-friendly policies. But Wyoming couples like Reese Lane and Sean Thornton say it's just too expensive to have kids now.
Sean and I started dating, and he said, I don't know, I think I want to have like 6 or 7 kids.
But as we went through like more and more financial struggles, I guess, eventually it came to like, yeah, I think we can have like 1 or 2.
The state university employees, both musicians, spent their 20s struggling to pay rent in tiny apartments. At age 30, they finally bought this house.
And I think that's when we started to realize, like, it might be too late. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to have children.
For now, they're focused on their fur babies, a Pomeranian and a Shih Tzu mix, who are dressed in matching bandanas with fall leaves.
They're 100% little babies. They're so spoiled.
Lane says it's heartbreaking to not have enough money to give even one kid a full life, but also freeing.
At least I can, like, have room for other things in my life, like my pets and like my band.
Which is downstairs in the studio getting ready for practice. Lane puts headphones on her fur babies to protect their hearing.
You have very sensitive hearing because you're a dog.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4.
For Wyoming Public Radio, I'm Hannah Merzbach in Laramie.
In Wyoming, up to 20,000 people depend on the healthcare marketplace for insurance. The marketplace exists for those who can't get coverage at work and don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid, which help older and poorer people. It's a lifeline for many farmers, ranchers, and people working seasonal jobs. In Teton County, that last group is a big part of the population. About 15% of the county uses the marketplace. But that option is about to become less reliable. Jackson Hole Community Radio's Jenna McMurtry explains.
Thomas Chapman has spent most of his 20s doing seasonal work. The 28-year-old moved to Jackson about 2 years ago.
I sort of flip-flop between seasonal work and self-employment work, and I mountain guide for Exum. I'm taking people up to Grand Teton.
And come winter,
and I teach them ski instructing.
That's all on top of a small business he runs as a handyman. It's taken years to find a balance. He says moving to the Tetons was part of an effort to find solid footing in a notoriously unstable field of work.
I think I'm very used to instability from working seasonally, and before moving to Jackson, I used to move seasonally every 6 months.
Recent news, however, throws a wrench in his plans.
So I just got a letter in the mail saying your coverage will be ending at the end of 2025. Find a new insurer.
Chapman's marketplace provider, Mountain Health Co-op, just announced that it's leaving Wyoming by the end of the year.
Well, I guess now I'm like back to wandering the streets of finding health insurance.
The co-op's abrupt exit leaves him and about 12,000 other Wyomingites with just a few months to find new coverage for next year. United Healthcare recently entered Wyoming, but doesn't have plans to insure Teton County residents. That leaves locals with one remaining marketplace provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield. But Chapman isn't sure that he can afford it.
So right now my premium is somewhere in the range of $560 per month. And going through the healthcare.gov ACA system, the tax credit covers all of it right now.
The tax credit that keeps his premium affordable is currently at the center of the ongoing government shutdown debate. Democrats in Congress say they won't agree to pass the federal budget without a compromise that keeps lower prices intact and makes sure the marketplace stays within reach for people like Chapman.
That I'm looking at $550 to $600 a month of an added expense.
Even if subsidies continue, the state's healthcare landscape is bleak, at least according to Alexander Moromsev. He's a Jackson-based board member of the Mountain Health Co-op and has a background in finance.
One of Wyoming's biggest exports is our young. So we have flat population growth, an aging population. We don't have healthy young people staying in the state to, offset the risk profile of their insurance pool.
Rural healthcare is also more expensive for insurance providers.
And so it's not a pretty picture.
A bad few months for the co-op in Wyoming meant the board had to pull out of Wyoming to stay open elsewhere.
And it pained me deeply, but it was, I think, the prudent financial decision to make.
In Teton County, he says that will likely mean rising rates of uninsured people, which means more people gambling with their health.
I mean, in general, we have a really healthy population here, but the issue is you're young and you're healthy and you're out skiing and biking and you break your femur in the backcountry. What are the odds of that happening? Pretty low. But if it does happen, it's, catastrophic health-wise, but also financially.
There are, however, some options for those left in the lurch. For one, there's a nonprofit in rural Wyoming where Wyomingites can talk to an expert about plans. Then there's always talking with insurance brokers. Both options are free. Jackson broker Heather Hun says there are a few places those in the marketplace can start. First, she says, people can start with questions at work.
Is there at all any possibility that they can get employer coverage? What does that look like? And then would they be eligible? Do they qualify? Would it be recommended for them to have a short-term plan?
Hun says to ask employers about reimbursements, something Chapman says he was once offered at a guiding job in Washington. If premiums ultimately increase, he says he can fall back on his girlfriend's plans, though that's a last resort. And a safety net he says many of his peer climbing guides and ski instructors lacked. For KHL News, I'm Jenna McMurtry.
Next up, we take a look at the complaints Wyomingites have made about recent elections. This is Open Spaces.
It can be hard to keep track of the news, but Wyoming Public Radio just made it a little easier. Now you can follow us on Apple News to get the latest stories from Wyoming right in the palm of your hand. Plus, you can get an audio roundup of daily local news in under 10 minutes with our new podcast. Check out Wyoming Debrief, a morning habit that pairs perfectly with your cup of coffee.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. In Wyoming, anyone who believes there's been a violation of the state's election laws can file a complaint to the Secretary of State's office. The allegations in those formal complaints, while unproven, can help provide a glimpse into what Wyomingites perceive as issues in the state's elections. Wyoming Public Radio's Chris Clements filed an open records request with Secretary of State Chuck Gray's office to get that glimpse. Thanks for joining me, Chris.
No problem, Nikki.
You filed a request to get formal election complaints submitted to the Secretary of State's office from when Chuck Gray was sworn in January 2023 to late July 2025. What do we need to know?
Well, Gray's office sent me 80 complaints. Most had to do with mistakes or wrongdoing by elected officials, like if someone thinks a county clerk selected election judges improperly. That category was about 42%. Next was improper campaigning, like when folks wave signs too close to the door of a polling location. That was about 17%. And then the third largest category concerned complaints about campaign mailers, which was a big topic of discussion in last year's cycle. That was about 16%. Finally, I identified 6 that contained allegations of voter fraud. That's 7.5%. Lander Senator Cale Case, who co-chairs the legislature's election committee, told me that a small number of voter fraud complaints makes sense to him.
When you get down to whether there was outright fraud and voter cheating or organized cheating, this kind of fits that. That is not happening. Our elections and their conduct have a high level of integrity.
Overall, kind of give me a sense. What were these complaints about?
Sure, I'll describe just a few. 4 of the complaints focused on election errors in Weston County. A county clerk there sent out ballot misprints in the 2024 election, which led to hand recounts.
Right. I've been reading about this in your recent reporting. What's the latest update here?
So right now, an oversight panel of state lawmakers is looking into what happened in Weston County and prepping bills meant to keep it from happening again. Plus, the governor is conducting a second investigation into the incident.
Got it. Anything else that stood out generally?
I also found it notable that at least 6 complaints were submitted by future, current, or former lawmakers.
I want to circle back to those voter fraud allegations. What were those specifically about?
One alleges that absentee ballots were sent out to the wrong addresses in Albany County and that those ballots were then cast. Another, made by the same person, claims a man dropped off a package with an election judge in Laramie at a polling site. He also mentioned concerns about student voters getting bussed in for the election from Colorado. And another involved a convicted felon allegedly attempting to register to vote in Crook County. And two were kind of duplicates filed by the same person, accusing a Shoshone town councilman of voting in the wrong precinct.
Interesting. What sort of caveats come with all of these stats you've accumulated?
Quite a few. For one, it's very possible some people submitted election complaints about voter fraud to their county clerk, not to Gray's office.
Got it. So those would not be included in your records request. What else?
Well, some voters, lawmakers, and advocacy groups or political action committees may have sent their election complaints to Gray's office through informal channels, like via text messages or phone calls. Our open records request asked solely for formal complaints. Plus, the way we broke complaints up into separate categories matters too. For instance, we defined voter fraud as instances of felons, non-citizens, or registered voters who voted somewhere they don't live or cast someone else's ballot. We didn't include complaints about potential fraud by elected officials in that category of voter fraud. Instead, those went to mistakes or wrongdoing by officials. But even if we had widened our definition of voter fraud to include fraud by officials, they would only bump the number of fraud complaints from 6 to 8. Finally, a lot of the complaints we received were undated and a small number were duplicative.
And of course, it's important to remember these are complaints that are unverified allegations about voter fraud or other election code issues.
That's right. If any have real merit, the Secretary of State can refer them to the State Attorney General's office for investigation. But Gray and his office didn't answer my emailed question about whether or not they've ever done that, so we don't know how frequently that may have happened. County clerks handled some. With all that in mind, Ryan Williamson, an assistant professor of political science at the University of Wyoming, told me even though the complaints are unproven, they can still be useful in determining what voters are concerned about with Wyoming elections. He thought it was interesting that there were only 6 complaints about voter fraud.
6 kind of in the tally kind of comports with what we saw in the Wyoming election year survey last year, where most people feel pretty good about elections in Wyoming. So I think it's just corroborating a really important aspect of elections in Wyoming seem to be going pretty well.
And here he's talking about last year's election year survey put out by UW. I remember it asked respondents how reliable they thought vote counts would be in Wyoming, and over 88% said either very or somewhat reliable. What does Gray say?
Well, first of all, that's quite a memory on you, Nikki. And second of all, Gray has made reshaping the way the state runs its elections a key part of his legislative agenda. He's very focused on ensuring non-citizens aren't voting in Wyoming's elections. That's a priority of President Trump's, too. And the state legislature passed a law requiring proof of residency when you register to vote. I should say here that only one of the complaints his office shared with me was about a potential non-citizen registering to vote. That person was indicted for passport fraud and pleaded guilty.
And Gray's office itself sometimes flags people who may not be citizens, and then county clerks can remove them from the voter rolls, and the county attorney can investigate if voter fraud happened.
Right. He just did that with 3 active voter records in Carbon, Lincoln, and Teton counties. When I asked Gray to comment on my findings, he said our reporting is misleading without specifying how. He also said, quote, "I'm going to continue to advance the common sense election integrity reforms that the people of Wyoming want. Our office takes all election complaints very seriously. This is why we have taken proactive steps to partner with the Trump administration to remove non-citizens from our voter rolls and refer them for prosecution," unquote.
Chris, why did you think it was important to request these documents?
So with the Freedom Caucus and its allies in control of the House, a lot of taxpayer dollars are going to study and draft election integrity legislation in Wyoming. And critics of some of those measures have said these reforms will make it harder for people to vote, not easier. So a big question for me and other reporters is, how much of a concern is election integrity to Wyomingites? Filing this records request was one way of beginning to answer that question.
And what'll be your next steps?
I'll be continuing to follow a series of bills under review by an elections committee that all died in the last legislative session. That includes one bill that would expand the use of hand count audits of ballots.
Lots to follow. Chris, thanks so much for sharing your reporting.
Of course.
Wyoming is poised to protect the world's biggest pronghorn herd and is one of the longest land-based migration routes in the lower 48 states. It's been years in the making, but the migration corridor also moves through one of the nation's top producing natural gas fields. This is causing friction between state and federal managers over what to do with lands that hold potential for multiple interests. Wyoming Public Radio's Caitlin Tan brings us to a critical wildlife nexus in southwest Wyoming.
Retired wildlife biologist Tom Christensen braces against the Wyoming wind, and his broad-brimmed hat, it's no match.
Thank you for catching my hat. This is a ball cap day, not a broad-brimmed hat day.
The Wind Rivers tower behind Christensen, pronghorn nibble grass. This section of desert is framed between two highways and the mountains. It's dubbed the Golden Triangle, coined many years ago by Christensen and another biologist.
Simply riding around out here in our truck one day talking about the values of this country to wildlife.
There's 3 world records here: highest density of sage grouse, longest mule deer migration, and the largest pronghorn herd. And all 3 populations are struggling, along with their habitat, sagebrush.
Either through development, urbanization, energy development, wildfire is a huge one.
This federal land is still largely untouched, and it's been mostly closed to development to protect these species of concern. But the Trump administration thinks newer tech could access hard-to-reach oil and gas deposits under some of these areas, and they want to explore it.
So that does not bode well for the future.
Christensen says this conflict is a tale as old as time for the state. It was on full display at a recent Game and Fish Commission meeting in Lander.
What is our role in balancing wildlife habitat with livestock, oil and gas development, which is our lifeblood, tourism?
Commissioner John Masterson and his colleagues were deliberating whether to add safeguards for that largest pronghorn herd, which biologists say is threatened by energy development. Masterson repeatedly asked the public in attendance,
If you were sitting up here, how would you weigh these things?
The room was peppered with cowboy hats, hiking boots, and suits, and everyone agreed they support wildlife, including Pete Obermuller with the Petroleum Association of Wyoming.
It's like asking if you support mom and apple pie. Of course, we all do. There's no question about that.
Obermuller says they already limit operations during some peak migrations and mating seasons. He worries adding more wildlife protections could be used as fuel to shut down industry.
It's not hypothetical, it's real, and in my position, I have to fight it every day.
Commissioners agreed, but ultimately followed the majority of public comments asking for those protections and gave their stamp of approval. Now it's in the governor's hands. If approved, it would limit development in migration bottlenecks. But Angie Bruce, director of Game and Fish, says,
if there's federal land with a federal lease or permit, it definitely would override a state jurisdiction.
So even if the state adds those wildlife protections, the Trump administration's upcoming revisions to a federal land use plan for some of the same area would supersede it.
We really want our federal partners to sort of pass the buck to us rather than doing it separate from us.
It's not clear what the feds are doing since the government is shut down. Back in the Golden Triangle, Tom Christensen clutches his hat. He looks over the desolate and harsh desert landscape, and he says it's wide open not because of our
intensive and intentional design to keep it wild and free and open.
Rather because
the soil sucks and the precipitation sucks.
Christensen calls it the edge of existence. But with new reports showing there are oil and gas resources, it might not be forever. For Wyoming Public Radio, I'm Caitlin Tan in the Golden Triangle.
Up next, a sneak peek at the Modern West's upcoming season on Weird Western housing. This is Open Spaces.
This time on Human Nature, a woman leaves her old life behind to find herself on the trail.
I think quitting was always at the forefront of my mind. I mean, there were many days that I truly wanted to quit and believed I was going to quit. And I'm not really sure what it was that kind of kept me going, but a lot of it was just wanting to prove everyone else and myself wrong.
Find Human Nature on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or our website, humannaturepodcast.org. That's Human Nature, one word, one N.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. From Wyoming Public Radio, I'm Nikki Willett. Wyoming Public Radio's award-winning podcast, The Modern West, is back with a new season. This is number 11. The 9 episodes are called Cheap Dirt, and they're all about the quirky and sometimes extreme workarounds that Westerners are finding for affordable housing. Host Melody Edwards traveled around the American West, visiting folks living in yurts, cars, tiny houses, old mobile homes, like this guy living in his RV.
It might sound fun to live off the grid, but until you see that snow whipping by and the storms coming on you and the wind and the thunder. I mean, I rode some stuff out in my trailer that probably wasn't too smart, but I'm like, whoa, here we go.
Melody's here to give us a sneak peek into this new season. Welcome, Melody.
Hi, great to be here.
What made you interested in telling the stories of people finding out-of-the-box solutions to affordable housing?
I knew from experience that it was a thing. I lived for 3.5 years in a canvas-sided geodesic dome outside Flagstaff, Arizona. It was in this area called Alpine Ranches, and it was kind of a no man's land. At the time, my husband Ken Kushnitsky and I bought 10 acres for $10,000, and it allowed us to live rent-free.
I mean, it does sound like a sweetheart deal.
Yeah, but it was a hard life. In one episode, we reminisced about it. We had no idea what we were getting into.
Alpine Ranches, when we first started looking at it, was the Wild West. Literally, people would get in gunfights out there. And, like, somebody got shot in the gut, and, like, you know, so it had its own kind of, like, set of rules.
And that was back in the late 90s. Since then, I've seen more and more Westerners going this route. And it seemed to have everything to do with the fact that 8 of the top 10 states with the worst housing shortages are right here in the American West. And that means that in those states, there's less than 30 affordable homes for every 100 people.
Oh, wow. I really didn't realize our region was that strapped. And just to say, affordable housing is generally defined as rent or mortgage that costs less than 30% of your income. So what did you learn as you started digging into the data about this type of lifestyle?
Well, I learned that the U.S. Census only just started trying to count folks living this way. They actually had to create a whole new category for people who aren't homeless, but who also aren't living under a traditional roof. They're now called transitory situations officially. Arizona has 12,000 people living this way. Here in little old Wyoming, we have around 1,000. But the census folks admitted to me that transitory situations are notoriously hard to count. It's kind of hard to go out and knock on a tent door, for instance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me about some of these people that you ended up talking to.
Well, one guy I met was a musician in Frisco, Colorado, and he was living out of his RAV4, even in their bitter winters.
I have my actual diesel heater right here. I have a gas can for extra gas, and this is the duct that will go from here into my window. And then that's where it blows the dry heat in there, and I keep warm all winter.
Really?
This has like the exhaust, so there's no fumes coming in, so it's nice and safe, no CO2. And I sleep in shorts every night, even during the sub-zero temperatures.
Wow.
Yeah.
How cold did it get this winter?
I think the coldest it got was like -9.
And then I also went and visited a Trona mine worker who's living off-grid in a 70s mobile home outside of Rock Springs. He's raising his 2 small children by himself, one who has Down syndrome and requires a lot of electricity for her medical equipment.
I get up at 5:30 just to get, my daughter has a G-tube, a gastral tube, so she has to have a pump. She takes all her liquids via this tube in her belly. She can't drink without aspirating.
So he had to buy extra solar panels for her care. He's now building a log home for them and making great progress, I might add.
Oh, wow. That makes me think of tiny houses. They seem to be all the rage these days.
They are. You've probably seen lots of cute miniature houses on Pinterest and Instagram, but they're actually, per square foot, about 40% more expensive than a regular house. But I met a couple in Fort Collins, Colorado, who got one much cheaper by winning it in an auction.
We thought we had lost, but because we couldn't go past the 45. I think 31,000 was already us being like, ee! But then the 36 was like just a last minute thing.
Yeah,
we were buying like scratch lottery tickets the night before it closed, like hoping we could win.
We ran an extra couple grand
to do something.
Who else did you meet?
I also went down to Taos, New Mexico to visit my brother's ex-wife, who's been struggling to live there lately. So many people moved there during the pandemic that rental prices skyrocketed.
I don't have money. I don't have savings. I don't have family that's giving me money. You know what I mean? Like, it's all me. So I was like, what can I do? So I started looking at land, and I thought, well, if I want land, I want water rights. So I found this property, I think on Craigslist.
She bought it, put up a canvas-sided yurt, some solar panels, and moved in. She's in her early 50s. And it's not the first time that she's lived in a yurt. She raised both of my nephews in one back in the 90s.
I mean, that sounds like my dream, maybe naively.
I mean, maybe. My brother and my nephew don't have many fond memories of the Mesa, which is another no man's land outside Taos, especially of their roads.
Nobody's grading anything. They don't even bring, you can't even get an ambulance out there.
No,
a
and
fire truck out
the
there.
cops won't go out there.
Cops won't.
Because it's full of gun-wielding Mesa hippies.
They literally will not drive over the cattle guard.
Yeah.
Off of the highway.
They will, but it has to be a pretty extreme circumstance.
Yeah.
Like a few years ago, like a Colt, I guess, the FBI got involved with that.
Yeah. And they, I'm sure, used helicopters.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. They did use helicopters.
Such no man's lands sell dirt cheap land, but they don't have many social safety nets. I also discussed that issue with author Ted Conover, who wrote a book on the subject called Cheap Land, Colorado, and it's about a similar area outside of Alamosa, Colorado.
So, yeah, it sounds like Westerners are turning to this off-grid living when push comes to shove, but there are some serious drawbacks to it.
Yeah. I mean, I heard this message loud and clear from the director of the Laramie Interfaith, a nonprofit that works to address homelessness and food insecurity right here in Laramie.
People who are going to go out and homestead and build their own cabins. And there are a lot of people that are able to do that too. Again, that's great. Where I draw an issue with this is the idea that, this is a solution to our housing crisis. Because it's absolutely not.
Over and over, I heard it's not really fair to let more and more people face the hardships of this lifestyle as an answer to a larger social problem.
Just from hearing these snippets just now, I can't wait to listen to the full season. When does it come out?
Episode 1, where I lay out the problem and share my own story of living off-grid, comes out on October 29th. So you'll want to make sure that you're following us on your favorite podcast app so that all the episodes just automatically download.
Very exciting. That's the Modern West podcast. Thank you so much for filling us in, Melody.
My pleasure.
This fall, Georgia and Dave Roswell went on a 10-day road trip and set up shop at 4 state parks around Wyoming. The couple were this year's artists in residence, there to make art in the parks and share their work with other visitors. Georgia's a studio artist, Dave's a retired high school art teacher, and the two just opened a new gallery in downtown Cheyenne called Blue Door Arts. Wyoming Public Radio's Hannah Haberman chatted with the couple about their travels, what they made during their residency, and how they met in the first place.
I had graduated college, broken up with a boyfriend, and I was sort of footloose and fancy free, and I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Africa, so I went to Africa for a year. Then when I came back, I had a cousin named Donna, and she said, oh, I met this guy named Dave. I don't know if you want to date him or anything, but he's an artist. So that was kind of the beginning, and we met in Canandaigua, New York. I was trying to date somebody else at the time, but Dave had so many fun ideas, and he was persistent. So
I'd give her a call and say, hey, do you want to go? There is a art show that's going on at one of the local colleges. And she'd go, well, no, I'm kind of busy. And I'd say, well, how about maybe tomorrow night? And she'd go, well, I think I got something going on then too. And I go, well, I don't know. I mean, I think it opens at like 6 in the morning. You want to, are you doing anything at 6 in the morning tomorrow?
Okay, I gotta say yes to this guy.
During this residency, you set up shop at 4 different parks around Wyoming. Describe some of the pieces you made.
What I knew I was going to work on is a series I call Riding the Range, which puts together a part of a map of Wyoming with the corresponding image that I make with textiles using discarded clothing and other household textiles. And I work small because the way I work is time intensive. So for me, I went out and took a lot of photos. So I had a lot of subject matter to work with. And on location did some colored pencils, thumbnail sketches. And then I had to really think through how I was going to work. And we ended up buying this 12 by 12 circular screened in tent, which we dubbed the art yurt. And in there, I had set up a table and all of my fabric and adhesives and things that I needed to get into the textile work. So in the end, I have 2 pieces from each of the 4 places that we visited.
Before we left on our trip to Kurt Gowdy, I went down to our local Harbor Freight and bought a bunch of sandpaper, 220 grit wet and dry sandpaper, and I got some chalk at Hobby Lobby, and I got some charcoal and some erasers, and I was all set to go. I've always enjoyed the big hoodoos in Kurt Gowdy, so that's what I worked on first. When we got to Guernsey, there were different types of rocks, but they were rock faces and stuff, so that kind of inspired me. And then when we got to Glendo, they also had some interesting rock formations. So that sort of became my thing. I enjoyed working with the material, but found that the sandpaper really didn't hold the chalk or the charcoal very tightly. Even when you applied a layer of a fixative to it, it still tended to shift and move. So I came home with a bunch of drawings that were kind of covered in a white dust of maybe gray dust chalk cover. That's the thing with being experimental with materials is sometimes they surprise you and sometimes they surprise you that there's negatives that you didn't anticipate.
Did you have any standout interactions with people as you were making art?
I was at a civilian conservation corps building called the Castle in Guernsey. And I was drawing and somebody came up and she asked to see my work and we talked for a while. And she ended up that she was from Webster, New York, probably about 45 minutes from where George and I lived most recently when we were in Western New York. And it was just a real positive interaction with somebody that was exploring Wyoming. They were just traveling through while we had lived in Wyoming for 17 years. It was really fun just to be the expert on Wyoming.
We enjoyed meeting many of the staff members from the state parks, and they were very supportive. We got a shower in Guernsey because the person that was in charge said, "Oh, we've got a shower. I'll turn the water on for you." I said, "Great."
Zooming out a little bit, is there a specific moment from the residency that really stands out to you?
We both want people to look at our work and enjoy it, but also get a desire to go out there and experience the parks.
Curiosity.
We're big on curiosity. We opened a new gallery just last Saturday, and our 3 watchwords are creativity, curiosity, and community. And I'd love to see those 3 things happen on our opening night. We're going to set up the art yard and kind of set up the way we worked as a public demonstration. I think it's important for people to see how artists work and that the time and experience that goes into creating work, it doesn't just happen overnight.
In your opinion, what is the relationship between art and community?
I believe that the arts are really important to a community, that they make it rich, fun, interesting. I think that art needs to be in our schools to really reach out to children, especially those who don't fit into other categories. So I think it's super important to creating community and keeping people engaged and curious.
And it adds a dimension that just brings a richness to people's lives. I think that when you understand what other people are trying to do, in particular with the visual arts, I think that it adds this layer of understanding of what it is that you're seeing around you. Artists can help them to see, to build understanding, and to find a commonality in what it means to be a person.
I think it starts conversations too.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about places they've been, if they've seen the work that we've done and they understand the space, or if it's new to them. You can help somebody see the beauty around you where you live, even though they may not pay much attention to it on a day-to-day basis.
Check out what Georgia and Dave created during their State Parks Arts residency at an exhibit at the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne that's coming up November 7th through December 19th. Stick around. We hear from Lynn Simpson about why the humanities are important in the cowboy state. This is Open Spaces.
Hi, I'm Grady Kirkpatrick, inviting you to join me for Wyoming Sounds. Along with your favorites, you'll discover plenty of new music. We bring you NPR news updates, weather, and we'll let you know about events happening around Wyoming. Wyoming Sounds from 9 to noon on Wyoming Public Radio and 24/7 online at wyomingsounds.org.
Welcome back to Open Spaces. The Wyoming Humanities Council lost 80% of its operational budget this year due to federal cuts. But now a new fund at the University of Wyoming will provide paid internships for students pursuing degrees in the humanities. The Pete and Lynn Simpson Student Enrichment Fund is named after members of a prominent Wyoming political family. Wyoming Public Radio's Melody Edwards sat down with Lynn Simpson to talk about the importance of humanities in the cowboy state. For Lynn, it started with her childhood, growing up in Cody.
So in the 5th grade, I went to Miss Dittman, who smelled of lollipops and lilacs. I mean, she was just a wonderful woman. And I said, I'd like to write a play, and I'd like to direct the play, and then I'd like to star in the play. And she said, okay. And so we did it. She let me produce, write, and direct this play of 10-year-olds. The end of the story is she went to my mother and she said, Fran, that was a 50-page play. She said, I never had any idea what I was getting into. Well, I think that story could be told all around the rural life.
Do you remember what the plot of this play was that you wrote?
Oh, it was very shallow. I think it was about behaving well and about good manners. And, you know, I made a lot of fun of people being punished if they didn't behave. And I mean, we made a drama out of it. We all were very well disciplined. And some of us were very rebellious about that. So that made the play fun.
A lot of times we think about little kids growing up in rural communities. That's one of the great things, is that you get to be this big fish in a small pond.
Well, that's true now for little kids. It's true now for adults. We have people moving to the rural communities because they're looking for their identities in a smaller arena of human experience. And they love the idea that they can have an impact, be known as an energy in your town. Bigger isn't always better. For human development on an individual scale, I think these rural towns have a lot to offer because we do have an identity and we do have opportunities. So yes, it's like the pioneer woman on a dang wagon. They brought the organ and the fireplace, the kids were singing. So the arts bring some kindness and beauty to sometimes a difficult rural life, some kind of celebration to balance the abrasiveness of the hard life that the frontier was offering. Very important.
I love this quote that you wrote. I think you wrote it.
Oh, dear.
The arts are a very necessary part of blessing and developing our humanness. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how that has been true for Wyoming.
There's something about being close to nature. I mean, the profound connection we have with the skies, with the mountains, with the beauty, with the air. I think they really have a connection, which then brings out things in you that have to do with spirit and creativity and a place for thought. I think that that's what we might miss if we don't cultivate that intentionally, because now we have too many things coming at us, already formed. It's so passive that when I talk about the development of the whole human, one of the premises I have is that the human is really a spiritual animal. Great people have sought nature. But you'll notice a lot of people tell their stories, and they'll seek the wide open spaces. They'll seek simplicity in order to bloom, in order to think.
I understand that you actually did leave Wyoming. You went to New York. Tell me that story.
Well, if you're shallow, a young person, you think if I'm going to be in the theater, you have to go to New York. This is such an erroneous idea, but I didn't have anyone to stop me. So I arrived in New York just with actual pieces of sagebrush coming out of my ears. I mean, it didn't prepare me for a very difficult and complicated life. If you're seeking a professional life where you make money as an actor in the theater, it is a monumental task and very difficult. I was not prepared, and frankly, the absence of running around in the sagebrush near Shoshone River was hard on me to be away from that. I missed the sun. I was trying to love everybody in New York, which got me in a lot of trouble. You can't walk down the street in New York the way you walk down the street in Meeteetse or Cody, where you can love everybody that you see coming at you. And so it closed down a Wyoming spirit. I just closed down. But let me tell you, theater is more alive for more people in Timbuktu and, Riverton, Wyoming, and that I see great talent and great intelligence in the theater arts.
The Wyoming Humanities Council has had quite a rough year. When those kind of services are being kind of pared down, how is that going to affect Wyoming and our humanness across the state when those kinds of programs are being diminished?
It will affect us. When you no longer have to understand your Constitution or your pioneer history, or you no longer have to read the greatest literature, you lose your humanness right there. We have a legacy of being human. You can't be a great citizen. I don't think you can be a great parent until you're connected with more than science and the paycheck. Humanness is about how we relate to our environment. So the rural setting will always have a place in an artist's life.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has
Wonderful.
been wonderful.
That was Lynn Simpson on the role of humanities in the Cowboy State, speaking with Wyoming Public Radio's Melody Edwards. Thank Thank you for listening to Open Spaces. The entire show and all the stories you heard here can be found on our website at wyomingpublicmedia.org. You can also find it wherever you get your podcasts. And we post all of our stories to the station's social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, and Blue Sky. Thanks to Melody Edwards, this episode's audio producer, and Cody Hume, our digital producer and social media manager for today's show. Open Spaces is a production of Wyoming Public Radio News.